Good day, dear friends. I hope you are well and that you will continue to be well. Because all of this is good. Increased efficiency is good. Exactly. Considering that was mentioned, a weak expression, increased efficiency, although it is true. Look, we will also do our best to keep up with this acceleration of efficiency. Quantum increase in efficiency. Quantum increase in efficiency. And for us to keep up with it, because if you keep up with this increase in efficiency and step outside of the narrative and assumptions, whether they are correct or incorrect, of course it does matter. But from this perspective, it's all the same, up to the present world, and you move into that future world which is already here, then you see that everything is actually very simple. And let's just sketch out a couple of sentences. We won't go into any details or try to interpret everything that's coming from Disneyland, what it means and how, even if we refer to it during the presentation, just so we can see how the situation unfolded. For example, currently on this planet, as depicted here, you have the following situation. If you lack energy, regardless of the format, or more precisely, the type of energy carrier you use, and if you don't have it yourself, we'll come back to this point, which means, do you have it yourself or not? Are you the one responsible for exploitation and for spending? Is it you or is it someone else? For example, our colleague Donald decided, just as he decided to be the president of Venezuela, you decide to be an ayatollah, then he changed his mind. But that's how it is. Then let me emphasize once again, I am a proud laborer, which I won't specify which ones, do you know, which ones I am most proud of, and God willing, there will be more to come. Anyway, if you don't have energy, you can try to buy it from the Midwestern American states. They still continue to insist they're selling it at an affordable price point, right? So the question remains, who exactly is going to end up paying for this and who can actually afford to pay? And you can, for example, buy it from the Russian Federation. Of course, provided that you're not under the influence of the United States or that you haven't on your own imposed some sanctions, and of course that along the way, for example, the Ukrainians or someone else doesn't sabotage a gas pipeline, oil pipeline, ship, and so on. And you can buy it, you can even buy it with yuan, just like our neighbors from the People's Republic of China, who are smoothing out this story about how the world is run from space. Of course, they have that there. They've implemented outsourcing there, which is the next phase of increasing efficiency. And, for example, Iran handles for them who will get energy under certain conditions or who will not get energy, at least from one part of the world, a very important one, especially from the perspective of that energy surplus, which, yes, can cover those various shortages from one end of the world to the other. In short, Iran is playing the role of Ukraine. It's the same. Iran is playing Ukraine and Iran is fighting for itself. That's the difference. I mean, Ukrainians are also fighting for themselves, however that may seem, yes, and that's that cosmopolitics at work. We have mentioned, so try now anywhere on the planet to obtain and buy some energy, but not within the framework of what I have outlined and described as the way energy transfer works. And that's it. That's how it is. You see, everything has come to where it needs to be. Now, what will happen and how it will happen, there will be various distractions, players for rumors, and everything else in the meantime. That's how a movie is filmed, how a play is staged. Please remember that. There will always be some kind of dismantling, old or not. And that's the whole story. However, this story, which is not new, now brings us to that crucial point. The point we've been approaching since the beginning of our gathering, without going too deep into elaborating the details. Now, on one hand, this might not be a particularly pleasant topic. It's not exactly a pleasant topic, especially from the perspective of many people in the world, where everyone loves each other, peace. You know, at least that's how the commercials for everything go. But this topic, collectively under that name and title, as we've explained, is that you have to fight for energy, whether to preserve your own or to seize a position. Precisely, everything that has been happening lately in the world, all of it on a daily basis, demonstrates the validity and, I can freely say, the final points that we've discussed through the story of cosmopolitics, especially the story about the control of exploitation, the control of flows, which we've been talking about all these years and decades. That's the point. You have to fight. Well, actually, you don't have to. And for those who don't want to fight, I have to thank my neighbor Donald. It's enough just to read some of his recent statements, posts on some social networks. I think that when you remove that layer of propaganda, which to an audience used to Santa Claus might seem strange, you can see who has best learned cosmopolitics. And Iran has learned well in that regard too. And that's how it is. And now, the only key question that remains is to see what, in fact, those who have learned or those who want to learn have to do and can do, and of course, who is interested. But I suggest that you don't think about that you don't concern yourself with what will happen to those, for example, who haven't learned this and who don't want to. You have no reason to think about them. And that's it. I don't know if the efficiency has increased enough. I don't know if it's a quantum leap from one world to another, but I suggest to you, if I have managed to explain this happily, not just on this occasion, but at this time, if you spend time together, to think about this again. Even if you have thought about it enough, and even if you have thought about it well, I'm not really in charge here. I'm not the one to judge who has thought well. My job is to maintain faith in thinking and, of course, faith in the struggle. Who put me in charge? Let that remain an open question. So, dear friends, everything is fine and everything is as it should be. And it will be good for the good ones, which, let's remind ourselves of this logical principle, also means that for those who are not good, it will not be good. That is the part that has disrupted the logic of the world so far and confused people, especially those who are not good and those who are not as they should be. And then he sees what is happening in this world so far and really can't say it's foreign because he realized that we are the foreigners. No. With this narco-socialism of the previous world, it's over, and even the beloved pets are getting that label. That's the simplest way to put it. If someone doesn't like it, they can leave. They can just waste away. I forgot the name of some story that was in the Readers or what it was called when I was younger. It was something like the house running after the master. And it really does resemble everything that's happening now. However, whoever wants to run, let them run. And whoever wants to fight, let them fight. I hope that the actions mentioned point out the difference between death and life and death. And if further clarification is needed, to anyone who is joyfully asking, my advice is, don't talk to them.
Now, let's say we won't go into details about who does what and how they do it. At first glance, you see a lot of things that seem illogical, strange, or inefficient, but in the end, everything works out as it should. Not because I want to prove something now, or because I think so, or because I'm joking, none of that matters. But if you go back to the introduction, you'll see that everything ended up where it was supposed to, which means things are working as they should. Now, as for how things are recorded and what gets recorded, you have to understand the historical context. And along with everything else, that's why I was so delighted when I remembered and saw this graph I pointed out to you and included in the material, where you can clearly see, for example, if you follow these 250 to 270 years, although it's interesting from the perspective of the emergence and development of the Central American states, however, it coincides with the course of the industrial revolutions. You can see that, in fact, things are falling into place, things are coming together, of course, for those who made an effort for things to actually fall into place. And of course, you see the next thing, which especially from the perspective of how things have been happening since then, must be understood in order to grasp the behavior, primarily, of the United States. You also see what someone has to do if they want to keep doing anything at all. And let's go back, especially for those friends who, during that war with the invisible enemies, didn't spend much time with us or didn't spend any time with us at all and weren't in our country. Let's go back to how we explained and predicted things according to the model, that the logic is that this transformation will proceed and reach where it needs to go. We said that when you look at what is left and what is needed, especially if someone wants to stay, if someone still wants to remain in some kind of industrial society, whatever that may mean, with all its pros and cons, that person actually has to fight to stay, to remain in the zone, to stay in the zone of consuming the remaining resources, primarily in the NSB. And there we describe that when you look at the situation, when you put it on the map, when you consider the various other positions and possibilities of different actors in that story, you have a clear situation. For example, the United States will either end up in a zone where they collapse and get devoured by someone else, or they will end up in a zone where they manage to save themselves. And no matter how it may seem, especially from the perspective of the many analyses of the events currently unfolding, I want to remind you once again that this must be viewed from the perspective that they are in fact trying to save themselves. I'm not talking about this because I'm rooting for anyone, nor am I suggesting that you should root for anyone. Rather, I'm trying to explain the essence of the matter. They cannot allow the tendencies that have continued and the space to act so broadly and recklessly, leaving problems for later and for someone else to solve, no longer exists, and that's the reality. And what did we say? That the key question is the following, which in my opinion is very simple, and I already mentioned it, so let everyone answer it as they will. Now, if you have, for example, the three most powerful by whatever parameters you want to use, especially if we're talking about physical strength, and especially if we're talking about control over what is essential and most important, namely energy and resources, as well as technical and technological development, and the organization to control that, whatever that might mean, control in whatever way it is applied. Will any of them now, whoever that might be, for example, the Soviet Union 40 years ago or the United States of America, the countries of the last 10 to 15 years, will any of them now get involved with others who are powerful enough to destroy them as well, to destroy everything, to wipe each other out, as people would say in everyday language, just so they could share a little with their beloved pets who like to bark a bit, to play around, to be petted, which is all charming, but from the perspective of survival, when you no longer have the conditions for that, is it better for you to get rid of your pets, get rid of being the most diplomatic way to put it, though maybe not the simplest word? You could say to carry out euthanasia, that would already be civilization. You take it, put it to sleep, and that's kinder than letting it out on the street. Now we'll see how this will play out in the movie, how much of this getting rid of will actually happen within that range. As you can see from what's been presented, that's exactly why they're behaving this way. That's why Kofi O'Donnell is making such statements. And considering the costs they have regarding people, energy, and all sorts of other things, it intensifies. So then in 10 to 20 years, when we come to the question of Australia, they'll either fight each other or they'll come to an agreement even then, just as we've explained, referring back to that event remembered from 2019. The year of the tanker war, the drone war. You can see how all of this plays out in practice now. You can tell that someone has trained for this, for those who remember what that drone war looked like in 2019. Not just anyone does this. They work carefully and responsibly, and they do training for everything as well. Now think carefully about what all the training has been done for, and consider carefully what the main event will look like on numerous issues, not just the most important one I'm talking about. And that's that. Any civilization or community that truly desires to survive as a functional, organized society, one that is capable of at least preserving its core operational structures and cultural content, while also developing certain key aspects, especially the most vital ones, must absolutely guarantee a stable and reliable supply of energy resources. This is essential, along with many other fundamental requirements for progress. Everyone else, forgive me. Granted, colleague Donov hasn't told anyone to forgive him yet, but he explained it to them nicely. And that's where the whole story ends, and the whole game and performance begins. And it's very simple. I apologize if you take this personally. You can trust me or check for yourselves. At this place, everything is very simple. No matter how they record it, no matter what they say. I'm sorry. I've always tried, really tried for a long time now, to create a similar graphic. In fact, I made one. If you remember, we talked about it 10 years ago, those tables about resources and energy sources. When I said that, actually, the ideal thing, if possible, is to have a picture. It doesn't matter if it's a table, you see a certain number of numbers there, or columns, or a graph, and it actually replaces not thousands, but millions of words. This, for example, is truly one of those. By the way, it doesn't really matter. The institute that made it is the Disneyland Institute, which tries more or less to be serious in Disneyland. And as I said, there are cases, especially when someone isn't under a lot of scrutiny, and, well, with a third-party team, that something becomes very popular. Often people do a lot of things quite correctly in their data processing, at least usefully. Now, you know how it goes. When you have to stick to or are under the pressure of preserving the narrative of the best world or improvement, which some people actually believe in, of course, some things get written that make no sense or logic, but if you cross-check the numbers and data properly, you can always find what really matters. For example, people have often asked me why, for instance, on that German chart or graph, Germany was never at any point a dominant military political global power, no matter what various positions it held over these past 250 years. It would be even more interesting, unfortunately India is not included, but by chance if you looked at the beginning, at the start of this period, about 250 to 270 years ago, you would see some similar figures appearing for China. Then you would see an even more rapid decline in various phases, and you would see that now, in fact, they have to, regardless of how many things are not connected in their behavior, behave in this way and at least try to graduate, and if they finish, to graduate from the University of Cosmopolitics. That's the logic behind it. And there isn't much room for mistakes here. I apologize. Does this make sense? If this works, how does it work? Now, the only thing that matters is how each has prepared for everything that will define who will survive and how they will be in the 21st century, as we discussed. Century, who is capable and who has prepared to implement and carry it out as soon as possible. And, on the other hand, who will remain stuck in the narratives and practices of the 20th century. You have to admit, regardless of who supports whom or what stance they have, but with everything I've said so far, you have to agree that, for example, someone who lives in the past could be said not to be truly alive, at least from the perspective of the present time and from the perspective of the future. And now, whether that's his own choice or someone forced him into it, it doesn't change the fact he isn't alive. He isn't alive. And that's the most zombified state one can reach. It's just that he's either more informed or not aware, or he refuses to be aware. That's zombieling. Now, that's exactly what defines that transition from Disneyland to zombieling. The awareness that you've remained in the past in a previous time, or to put it even more effectively, that you no longer exist, or the refusal to accept that. Is the refusal to accept any conclusion, especially one that is crystal clear, and especially those conclusions that concern the most important things, whether something is good or not good, regardless of how traumatic it might be from the perspective of habit? I hope the answer isn't too difficult, but just in case, answer for yourself. And for those who have answered that question, let's move on and then increase our efficiency. And it is precisely here that we come to the absolutely critical and fundamental turning point, the main point, to see the necessity of this profound and transformative quantum leap. Whoever hasn't made it yet, it's better to do it as soon as possible if it's not already too late, and to see how it must be done. Not because I say so or because I think so, but because of everything that those mentioned and unmentioned are doing right now, which is why we must increasingly and more effectively move in the direction of life, whatever that may mean. Survival. Survival literally in the sense of the basic necessity of simply staying alive. Survival in the sense that some mutt is chasing you down the aisles, under the many different and numbing forms of psychological anesthesia, to see how simple it really is. And how this now leads to the key thing. Yes, the key thing, and the key thing, as we said, is that in this phase of transformation we will look at it step by step, not to prove what we've been saying, but to show, considering how the transformation and the process unfold, to try to illustrate it and to demonstrate precisely the logic of the process through that. These are organizational formats. And what are organizational formats? Well, the following are organizational formats. Especially you can forget about this technological advancement, which literally happens on a daily basis. I've been observing this for years now, at least the last 4, if not more. This exposes everything completely. That's why I had students from all over the world, and it's going pretty slowly now, probably because they are soft-hearted, so they can't make such sudden and quantum leaps, and then at some point someone says, come on, that's enough, we won't do this anymore, let's play some ring game and fool around. Now we'll do this if it's needed. And that's an organizational format. And especially, don't forget to briefly mention, in terms of communication and all the systems that already exist in the cosmos and what they enable, I'm not even going to list them now, drones, unmanned vehicles, all sorts of means, not just aircraft and everything else. And this leads to a crucial point, which is that from this context, and especially from the perspective of those who want to fight and survive this, it must be understood that the key question is how things are organized. And even if someone is not organized, we have to fight. You can't just fight like that, just because we suddenly decided to fight for some reason. No. In order to fight, you first have to get organized. You can try otherwise, but it turns out the way it turns out. And in general, especially given the development of organizational formats in the 21st century. No. You first have to create an organizational structure that enables you to fight for what you need. Because quite obviously, having a high quality and robust organizational structure can truly help you to endure many different things, many difficult things that you may frequently encounter in that long struggle, and you certainly will encounter them at some point. This kind of solid foundation is absolutely essential for your long-term success. And if you don't have an organizational structure, or if you have an organized society in which the constituents, not by accident, or the members are not ready to fight for what is most important for that community, then it's better for you to have nothing at all. Or to put it even more precisely, it's as if you don't exist, whether that's better or not. But as far as logic goes, that's how it is. This essentially is something that some people, especially the older generation, remember. And it wasn't just present here. And people used to wrongly associate it with certain social systems that existed, for example, in our region and in this part of the world. Through the concept of an armed people, whatever armed means, whatever people means, the essence, in fact, is that it proves, among other things, without going back into the topic of what a republic is, regardless of what you think about development in other formats or names of organization, that simply thanks to increased efficiency, thanks to technical and technological development, and thanks to the 21st century, because this has literally brought things to a head. Wherever people are not organized and ready to fight, not to mention what has already happened to them, the opportunity will reveal itself soon enough. If they don't want to see it, well, people have to fight. Whatever that may mean, and they especially emphasize from the perspective of technological development at a different moment and stage, and today and tomorrow. In practice, this means, now, if the most important concept is organization, and from this perspective, if we return to, for example, the concept, idea, and thesis of an armed people, the key question is, who are the people? First, you have to define who the people are. That might seem complicated, but it isn't. You may have noticed that in Disneyland or in some building or whatever, they can create a people however they want. And they did. We talked about it. You can't even count how many peoples they've created. And each one of them has its own honor. And the people accepted that, and they all still wanted to be created. However, only a people can create itself. Every people that creates itself was actually created by Disneyland. What about Lonich now? Or someone else? You see, now we're in that world, someone else. We're talking about that. For eons, basically, either you are still someone else in this new world, which, as we said, has already happened to him and he is gone, or you are actually somewhere where you have created yourself. Because only in places where communities have created themselves and are ready to make various sacrifices for that persistently, and not just wait together for some handout collectively for the next pot or trough, only those will be in a position to fight, especially from the perspective of technological, and any other kind of development that is present there. This was also the case at lower levels of technological development, and now it is obvious. If you do not have your community defined, if it is not defined and organized, how do you protect that community and its interests? And then will colleague Donald, colleague Vlada, or someone else declare themselves to be your president and I'll be the king or whatever. And somehow that's how it should be, no matter how this sounds. Because, of course, if you ultimately decide to choose nothing else for yourself and you simply allow your life to unfold without direction, you might eventually end up becoming something entirely by accident. If that happens, then you are essentially letting your future be shaped by someone else's hands. It is far better to leave those roles to whoever possesses a much deeper sense of genuine interest and a far greater level of natural enthusiasm for the path than you currently do. When I say interest, of course, let's not overlook, we also have to go back and revisit how we explained considering the state of reserves, the resource base, especially when it comes to energy. We explained that there are territories, countries, these, how should I put it, spent irrelevant ones, and those that are important. And now I'm speaking especially from the perspective of those who are in a territory where something important is located. Granted, even if you are in a territory where that important thing, or rather where there is nothing important, you also have to deal with it. That is, you have to set up and organize things in a similar way. That's why, as it was just mentioned, I can be proud of both the students from Iran and the students from America. We'll see later what and how they have learned. They know, I would say this, they know knowledge even without us, but it gets supplemented, which is good. That is the best relationship between students, teachers, and so on. That is the meaning of knowledge. Therefore, those who want to keep what once was, and if they want to preserve it, or if something is missing and they want to achieve something, they must organize themselves well. Just as it sounded and just as it appeared in the narratives, tales, and gardens of the late Disneyland. So now you decide what you'll do, how you'll do it, and take it from there. At this level of the story, that's it. Of course, here the elaboration is extensive and it's complex. It really is nothing at all when you think about it. Well, I suppose that is simply how things tend to go in these situations. And of course, it ultimately depends on the specific things that each individual person chooses to believe in throughout their own lives. That's an important point. What each person believes in. When I say belief, let me clarify right away. I mean belief in the sense of meaning or purpose, any kind of organization, or more precisely, any kind of activity. Many people were confused by that ease and pampering that was made possible by the current and supposedly best of all possible worlds. And, you know, anything goes, come however you want, hey, we'll even fix things for you. If you break the lava, just break it again, and so on. However, that's exactly what it is. That's the easiest way to keep away all those who should be allowed access to the source. However, for those who, regardless of the circumstances, although it is actually very important, just as they have consistently done up until this very moment, but at least for now, only want to watch the show and cheer, I truly wish them a safe and pleasant journey ahead. As far as I am concerned, may it be a happy one. But I sincerely hope it is becoming more obvious by the day exactly how and precisely where that long journey will eventually come to an end. And for those individuals who want to embark upon a completely different life path, and who don't want someone else to dictate and decide not only the path, but also the specific duration that their personal journey lasts, they absolutely have to become highly organized and focused. And they have to organize themselves as an efficient community. Now, for the sake of the efficiency of this show, let's revisit what we discussed about formation. And to understand how we said that, in fact, a republic, this republic, is a formation that is actually the state of a political community that is in a permanent state of war. Even when there is something called peace, I'm telling you why I love war and why I love to fight. No, I'm talking about what I love and why it has to be this way. But it doesn't have to be the same for everyone. You get annoyed until neighbor Donald or neighbor Vlad gives up, and then someone else comes along who looks more like a villain, and then things will be different. Now, if they start fighting over energy more, that could maybe happen. See, that's what all that data and those models are useful for. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. That's every one of them. Now, to add to that, let me say something else. It's very important to develop this, and maybe, probably due to my own mistake, if I don't say it or if I phrase it awkwardly, maybe someone will interpret it this way or that. Believing without struggle doesn't really mean anything at all. I don't know about you, how you're used to things, but for example, I don't ask what a person believes in. It's good, and a person should believe. If nothing else, let them believe in themselves, and that's legitimate, even if some people might mess that up. However, the fact that people believe in something but don't fight for it, in my opinion, even though it sounds pathetic and sentimental, and they always make those kinds of movies about us, as far as I'm concerned, those are just jokers. Maybe even worse than jokers. And I apologize if that sounds like too radical a word, but that's just how I see it. In fact, to me, that's even worse than those who fight but have no faith, no value system, but at least they're fighters. But as much as there may not be a big difference, at least from this point in the universe, or maybe it's just a matter of personal experience, to tell you the truth, I actually find these people who claim to believe even worse, because if they truly believed, they would fight for me. No, they just claim to believe they're supposedly good, they supposedly wish well, but they won't fight for some reason. They believe, but not enough to get involved. It's not like the faith my mom and dad gave me. It doesn't matter. There's never time, or there's always something more important. It's legitimate. So the question of whether you believe in the meaningfulness of what is being done and for whom it is being done is absolutely connected to what you actually do about it. Ultimately, does that mean you should fight? Whatever that means and however you might see it, especially in terms of technical, technological, and all other kinds of development. It's actually always the case. This 21st century is great, no matter what anyone thinks. Now, it's all packaged up, and the remnants of these developmental centuries remain, but that doesn't mean everything about it is great. Now, they throw all sorts of narratives, packaging, propaganda at you, but it doesn't matter. If that's the case, then there are no excuses. And that's exactly what the students are showing in the dialogue. Now, of course, for the sake of the show, for the sake of young children, for the sake of pets, no one is going to say it that directly, but just look at what they're doing, then compile that and try to translate it into the problem-based language I'm speaking in. I'm speaking for myself, you know who I'm speaking for. And that's it. You see that it's needed anyway. For those who need it. For those who are good. What more could you want? And as you'll see, if someone doesn't like it, they can leave. And that's it, dear friends. Now all that's left is to work. Whatever that means, it means a lot of things, whether I mention it or not. And it will be good, for the good. With that, I warmly greet you and wish you all the best. According to how good you are,